Ask is the type of artist you get when you mix the classic art form of portraits with pretty anime girls, who besides all the complicated pieces, creates some of the most simple yet elegant portraits, mixing her knowledge of color with interesting composition to create these incredible pieces. There are many studies on YouTube on how to render like Ask, but what I want to focus on in this study is the composition of her pieces. On first glance, the composition may appear to be easy to replicate, but there's a lot going on under the surface that you don't notice unless you try to analyze it. This is evident by my previous tries of replicating the style. So in this video, I will try to figure out how Ask composes her images to be able to draw such stunning portraits and how I can apply it in my own tries. First is the character's eyes. Second is their overall shape and outline. You can tell your outlines are good if you can black out the character and the silhouette still looks beautiful. This is how Ask answered when she was asked what makes a good looking portrait in her interview with Pixiv. The beautiful eyes part, despite not being easy, is pretty straightforward. But what interests me the most is the second part, making the silhouette look beautiful on its own, without rendering skills, without knowledge of color, simply through shapes. The obvious question is then, how exactly can we create a beautiful silhouette for our characters? The short answer would be to copy the composition of professional portrait photographers. But what Ask recommends to do, and what I am more interested in, is to study these portraits you like, no matter the art form. So I collected my favorite Ask portraits, as well as some photo portraits that intrigued me, to see if I can find patterns that I can replicate. The study part of this video is a summary of what I learned. The silhouette is determined by many factors, like hair, hands, or outfit. But the most impactful aspect is the pose. Looking at my collection of pictures, I started to notice patterns across all of them. First is that the character's body is almost never facing the viewer, but is turned away from them. This could be a slight turn or a drastic turn, which helps avoid a boring shape and creates an asymmetrical and dynamic pose. A dynamic pose makes the image more interesting and the viewer's eyes begin to flow around the illustration. The face can then be angled more towards the viewer, and the eyes are usually looking directly into the viewer, though there is definitely an appeal to eyes that are looking into nothing, which gives a more natural vibe to the character. Another pattern that makes the pose more dynamic is the underlying shape language. When analyzing portraits, you notice that the shape of the pose creates an asymmetrical triangle, which is the shape associated with movement and action, contrary to a square, which you almost never see in these portraits. You can see the triangle in almost all of these portraits by Ask, which again helps create a more dynamic illustration. This of course is all from my digital artist perspective, but I was still interested in learning how a photographer thinks about composition in their work. So I tried taking some portrait photography classes, which helped me see portraits from a different yet similar perspective. This series of classes are called the Portrait Photography Learning Path, which is available on Skillshare, the largest online learning community for creatives, with many classes led by pros from varying creative fields such as illustration, painting, design, film, photography, crafting, and music. And the learning paths are a great guide in teaching you new skills and bringing you closer to your creative goals, and starting your learning journey whether you're a pro or a beginner. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The character's gesture and overall mood is usually very relaxed, which makes them seem very confident, adding to the elegance of the pose. This reflects itself most importantly in the hands and facial expression. You can see that the hands play a big role in this, since they all seem to have a natural gesture without any tension, making the fingers drop and bend and act on their own accord, and every finger seems to have its own movement. The eyes are more often than not the focal point of the portrait, so it is an area you have to pay close attention to get right. Ask says in her interview that even the slightest change to the eyes would change the entire face. The relaxed expression is visible through the subtlety of the expression, like here where the eyes are closed slightly more than usual, or here where they are slightly open. These subtle expressions, as well as simply drawing the eye in an attractive way, are key to achieving a natural and elegant looking face. When it comes to the placement of the character, it most often follows the rule of thirds. Basically, you divide your canvas into thirds vertically and horizontally, and the areas where these lines meet are the best to put your focal point in. You can see this in all kinds of visual art, even in landscape paintings. These points are programmed into the human brain to be visually appealing for some reason. The focal point doesn't always have to be exactly on one of these points, but it is often at least somewhere along the line, which is also more visually appealing. Another way of supporting your focal point is through saturation and value contrast. I explained this in detail in my previous video, but basically, making the focal point or area in some way different than the rest of the piece makes it visually appealing as well, which you can achieve through value or saturation contrast, among other things. You can see that the eyes or the face are often either very saturated or have a different hue than the rest of the piece, which makes them optimal for a focal point and the eyes of the viewer go onto them directly. Now let's try to apply everything we learned on this piece as an example. You can see that we have an asymmetrical pose with a turned torso. The head with the arms create a triangular shape, which makes the piece very dynamic. The character is pretty relaxed and seems very confident. As a result, his hand gesture becomes very chill, as well as his expression with quite casual eyes and partly opened lips. Also, notice how the face has the lightest value in the entire piece, making it very attention-grabbing, and the eye is in very saturated blue, making it the clear focal point. The eye is also placed almost perfectly according to the rule of thirds. Lastly, we have a very simple background that complements the character and doesn't distract from it, which you can see in almost all of Ask's portraits. Since this study is all about composition, I'll try to break down my thought process throughout. With that being said, here's my reference board. I've drawn Frieren and Feren in the past, so obviously it was time to draw Stark now. First of all, I wanted to have a pose that isn't static, but isn't too dynamic either, like the ones Ask had. I know that I can achieve that if the underlying shape is a triangle, like I explained before, which I made with the stick of the axe connecting these two hands. And those lines connected with the head create a triangle. I also made the character have a relaxed gesture and expression, as we've discussed before. Then I tried to look at the silhouette and see if I can improve it in any way. But I was quite satisfied with this one, so I just went to rendering. And this was the result. In hindsight, I would have drawn a pose that was closer up to the face, because I wasn't able to give the eyes as much detail as it deserves. Also, the pose doesn't feel very balanced, and there are many small anatomical mistakes. But considering the little time I spent on it, I'd say I'm quite satisfied. Ask is a master of her craft, so obviously I couldn't get results as good as hers. And there's a lot more to break down about her style, so this isn't going to be my only Ask video. But I was quite interested in the composition, which is an aspect no one usually pays attention to. I'm honestly quite unsure if the information presented in this video is valuable to the average artist, but composition is something I am personally obsessed with, so I definitely found value in making this video. If you're interested in more composition content, especially on value, then consider watching this video in which I explain everything in detail. I hope you enjoyed and you could learn something new from this video, even if it was quite theoretical. Lastly, I want to thank you for watching until the end, and I wish you a peaceful rest of the day. Take care.